This is the backdrop design UX meeting for Thursday, December 30th. As is our want, we will go around the room and do quick brief introductions. I'm Robert Lang, bug folder on the internet, coming to you from Altadena, California. I'll pass it over to Joseph.
Hi, I'm Joseph. I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. And yeah, Greg.
Hi, I'm Greg. I'm joining from Greece. Generally interested in anything related to Backdrop and trying to get some things fixed or features getting in for the next release. Excited about that. Can't keep up with the community anymore. Things are moving way too fast for me. Passing it on to Tim.
Hey, my name is Tim Erickson, or St. Paul Tim. I am in Deerwood, Minnesota, and I am, well, I had big plans for getting stuff done this week that family and holidays have all kind of crushed. So we'll see what we can do in the last few days. We've got a code feature freeze in a couple of days. So that's all of us. Let's go ahead and just sort of jump into the meeting. We have haven't put much thought into the agenda, but I know that we have. Sounds like Greg and Robert hopefully have some agenda items.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting joined by Wilbur. Hi, Wilbur. Could we just dive into issues one at a time, or do we want to list a couple quick? Is there a couple? We were talking about token filter. Is that a design UX meeting?
I guess it's more in the dev meeting rather than that, unless.
Question, it was whether to put it on b.org. And
Sure.
That's sort of our external face. So b.org questions often seem to show up in the outreach meeting.
Yep.
Cool. Would have been next week. It would be great to get an answer from the dev folks.
Well, yes. So the outreach meeting would be next week. Does anybody have any objections to us putting token filter on b.org along with the module to dynamically display dates based on user's browser?
I think these would both benefit, like they would fix small issues that we've been having for quite some time. So I'm not objecting to that.
Yeah.
We were hoping to get Jen involved in that discussion. We'll see if she shows up at the next meeting, but she's not been around much lately. Robert, I would say if we don't hear otherwise today, I don't think there's any reason we need to hold off on that. I think we could just go ahead and do it. It's totally reversible if there's a problem, right?
Yep.
So I wouldn't delay this too much longer. Okay. There is, so what else? We had started to talk about right before the meeting. Well, no, that was, okay, the issue, Robert, you had brought up was this one. So we're gonna kick that can down the road. Greg, you had an issue.
Yeah, it's hard to explain. I tried to sort of like, I started putting it all in a draft issue that I was creating, but I guess maybe it's better if I share my screen and I show you guys what I was working on. It's another one of those rabbit holes. I was working on another issue that led me to this. So
maybe Greg, can I ask a question first?
Sure.
With the feature freeze in a couple of days, is this relevant to the feature freeze? Or is there? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I'm working on an issue that has sort of like introduces new things in the form API. And the issue that I've been sort of like working towards is the inline form errors. So all these issues that I've been finding recently are, rabbit holes, things that are either direct or indirect blockers to the things that I'm working on. But
Okay, let's
yeah,
just go ahead and jump into it then.
yeah, this one has to do with form validation and odd things, or we're trying to make the UX better in certain forms, and we are using certain workarounds. I'll better share my screen. Bear with me. So this has to do with, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Mhm.
So this has to do with an issue that Robert raised recently. Please ignore any debug messages. I'm still working on things. Just to improve the cron configuration page, right? So this has to do with UX, as in making it less confusing to understand what options people have when it comes to configuring how cron runs on their site, right? And I provided a mockup. So the issue that Robert raised initially was to improve the text. So I created a meta issue which says, yes, improve that text, but also maybe do other things like group things together in field set, like I've done here, field sets, and sort of like in each field set, have a distinct option and some help text and possibly links to documentation, which I think that improves the situation. And then maybe I'll just, for context, I'll spin up a demo site while that's happening in the background. We'll wait just to see what the before and the after was. And then I reached the point where one of the options for cron, like what I've done here is I've split the options for cron because we are using arbitrary and hard-coded values. So I've split the hard-coded sort of like drop down into a number field and a drop down field, which provides more flexibility. What I've also done is I've used this sort of like pattern where we sort of like I'm just calling it natural talk, sort of like interaction with the user. Instead of putting these fields separately, we just sort of like have a sort of like a phrase, and then we have form elements inside that phrase. And this is not the only place where we use that successfully. We've done it here, for example, which works beautifully. But again, we have a fixed set of values here, right? So I'm going for consistency. Sorry, this has spun up. So just let's see what the default is out of the box. So if I go to configuration, then it's system cron. So this is basically the before, and this is the after, like what I'm aiming for as an improvement, right? Now this thing, I find it to be a much better interaction than this thing, run cron never, or arbitrary values that we have here. But while I was working more on it, I realized that how we achieve this kind of interaction with the user is by using prefixes and suffixes for the fields. This causes problem for translation because this thing ceases to be a single phrase that people can translate. So yes, in English and in most languages, this suffix here would need to be translated separately. But if you translate the whole phrase, the go suffix in other languages might need to go here, which is a prefix for this form element. So what I've been trying to do was to actually render this as a single markdown field and have these be placeholders within that markdown field. And these placeholders would basically render the field elements. And if you just allow me to uncomment a few things on the code and refresh the page, bear with me. just ignore the error messages for now. So, and this, which is basically my working around of plural, right? I have a solution for that. But my point is that the elements now, this is a single phrase in a T function. So I'm getting the elements to render, but there's no default values in them. And then there's states doesn't work because the name attribute has not been attached to any of the elements. And what I'm using here, I've tried both render and backdrop render within T and outside of T. And I've realized that these functions, when you individually try to render elements in a form, they skip setting some attributes. So I was wondering if that's expected and how do I get around it? So that's where I'm stuck now. Because if I revert the changes here, this works beautifully, as in when there's a single value instead of plural, it's minute instead of minutes. So everything becomes singular using states. So this is where I'm trying to get to, sort of like have a more natural language in the UX of setting these things. And then also trying to make it, be a consistent thing for other places in the UI where we use this pattern. So yeah, I haven't pushed any code yet anywhere. Maybe it would help if I pushed a PR and people can chime in, or have you sort of like has anyone come across this problem before of, rendering field elements, form API, elements individually, and then, I don't know, is there a trick to get them to work properly?
Joseph or Robert, do either of you have an answer? I'm not going to be helpful here.
I don't know if I have an answer, but I would question, is it possible to accomplish this by just putting them as a string of form elements, but CSS formatting them as inline elements so that they fall in a row? And so then the individual strings can be translated. Does that accomplish the goal?
Yes, it would. But the thing is that, again, we're breaking a sentence that would make sense and people can translate into multiple sentences, which might not be making sense in other languages. So my goal was to basically use the T function with placeholders, but the placeholders, instead of being variables, are renderable form API elements. And this is what is not working at the moment. Maybe I'm just trying to do something that was not meant to be done, but most likely that. But yeah.
Right.
Joseph?
Is there, are you, when you're rendering them, are you're rendering just the one element and then taking the output from that and passing it in? Or are you trying to swap it like after you've done the T function?
No, I'm doing it inside the T function. So basically the backdrop render or render are being passed as the array variables, the placeholder array variables. Yeah, anyways, first of all, the feedback that I want is, and maybe I'll push this in a PR so that people can play with it. First of all, do people find these sort of interaction better? Because I get annoyed by this sort of thing. Like we have this Drupalism and backdropism where we say select never, or add the keyword never if you want this disabled. Whereas we do have a proper way to do that, and it's doing that, right? So if you want things enabled, you click a box. You don't set the minutes to never or none, right? It's not natural interaction.
Yeah, almost every time when I'm making a form, I have a enable disable global checkbox that just disables everything.
Yeah, and if we need to save a single value, as in save 0 minutes as an interval, we can do it in a validation or submit function. We can still save 0 as a value, but the thing is that the UI doesn't have, like, we don't have to burden the users with developer stuff. That's where I was getting at.
Mhm.
I like everything you've been doing on this page. So.
Well, I mean, in this, if last cron was one more than 0 minutes ago, well, that would just mean it runs cron on every single page request.
Yes,
That-
I'm not
I- that-
allowing. I'm not allowing less than one. Right.
Oh, okay. I would expect that would be the expected behavior if you wanted it to run on every page request.
Yeah, and I don't have a second. There wasn't any option for seconds before. Like the minimum that we had before. Sorry, where is it here? Was 10 minutes.
But if we're going to allow people to choose run it on every page request, then I'd rather see a radio button or disabled or a second radio button for run on every page request, or a third radio button for run on the next request if the last one was after, rather than doing 0.
I mean, maybe we probably don't need to support that in core, because running it on every page request would be an extremely unusual configuration.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and there was no way to do that before, right?
Right.
So it's not a feature regression.
You could use, I mean, you could use a contrib module to do that, like Alias cron, but then again, that's a contrib solution to the problem.
Yeah.
You also have developer tools to be able to set, well, I guess not, sorry. I would say this, Greg, I really like as well what you're doing here, and this is 1,000% better. And I would say if you're getting really hung up on this last piece, you know, it feels like perfection is getting in the way of.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
If you can get this last form element to be a reasonable proximity, right? Maybe it won't completely work, but let's get this out the door because it's great.
Yeah, so this is why I started filing. So this is the draft that I have. Bear with me. So I started by saying this: allow more flexibility in hard-coded values, just in general, right? Maybe it's better to see that. And I haven't raised this issue yet. It's sort of like I'm working on it, but what I was getting at is that maybe we can get that in, and this will not be a an odd thing because we're doing it here. But now I've seen that these are fragments of T functions, and I was trying to translate them in Greek, and I saw that in some languages maybe this bit of the text might need to be a suffix of the. So we need to shuffle things around. So ideally, we would have the T function being able to render form elements and still have them work as expected. But what I'm probably going to end up doing, as you said, I'm going to leave it as is now with fragments of T's as in used as prefixes and suffixes, but then raise this as a follow-up issue to figure out a way to do it properly and then list the places where we need to revisit. So I think most likely we're probably going to do that. So yeah, anyway, so I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, the render system is probably treating form fields by themselves as a different thing from form fields as part of a form. And so that's probably why things are not working.
Yeah, and I was trying to do some research to see what happens in Drupal land as well, but I wasn't able to find a similar issue or a person suggesting a similar solution for things like that.
Okay.
But yeah, anyway, so this is the UX thing that I was working on recently.
Well,
if anyone, I'll probably get those things. I'll file a pull request so people can test things, and then I'll file that follow-up issue so we can see what we can do in the future. Yeah.
Well,
is anyone else working on any other UX issue?
Does anybody else have anything? So we've talked so much about it. I don't want to talk about pageless nodes until we've got everything else covered. And also that could be in either meeting. So
yeah, is there any progress, any blockers in that team? Were you waiting just for text, sort of like input from
No.
others' feedback?
there's a discussion about it, but I'm going to hold off a minute. Anybody else have anything else?
So I
Robert?
I was gonna say, I had the issue, it's 405 and it 5405, and it really just boils down to what's the right term that we should use everywhere? Or is it a URL alias or is it a path alias? Because both are in the documentation. And it would be nice to mean that one thing. And it would be nice to use the same term everywhere. And there's kind of contradictory answers to that sprinkled throughout the past. So it would be, I was hoping we could kind of get.
Yeah, I think that we have agreed what we'll call them in core, but our documentation might be coming from other places as well, like copy paste from d.org. So we might not have this revisited documentation yet.
Well, no, this is actually in core.
Core.
So in that first issue, there's 61 path alias and 187 URL alias, and that's all in core code. And so it looks like URL alias is the dominant thing. And that's consistent with that first comment of 4868, which is from Jen. So it looks like the preponderance of evidence is URL alias, except there's still, well, there was some post commentary suggesting URL alias is not a great name, but also there's a comment from Jen that I also linked to, in which she suggests renaming the URL alias table to path alias. So
Yeah,
it wasn't
I
a
understand.
clear cut that we actually, I couldn't tell whether we really did have a defined answer. So
Yeah.
and I just like to get a defined answer, and then I'll go change everything to that, and then we'll be done.
Yeah.
But
If changing the table, the schema causes issues with Drupal upgrades, I would like us to avoid that. But when it comes to documentation and UI elements, I would like us to be consistent. Because I haven't thought it properly until now, my only thing is concern is that, do we have conflicting things when we mention these terms, or do they both refer to the same thing? Are we 100% sure that they're referring to the same thing?
Yeah, that's what I'd be worried about, because URLs and paths aren't actually the same thing.
Exactly.
A path is a part of a URL. Not all paths are URLs.
yeah, but everything where we use the two words together, URL alias, seems to be, I mean, I haven't actually looked at all 187 examples, but it seems to be everywhere we use the term URL alias, we are referring to what is called elsewhere a path alias. And so, for example, on
I believe you are correct about that one.
on the link in the third paragraph that says this page uses both, in path.inc, you see both terms on the same page referring to exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can only think of one place where there is a difference, and that would be when you're looking at file paths, paths for where public files and private files and temporary files are set. That's actually a path alias, which would be potentially in the server root rather than in the installation. And so that is a path alias, but you're right, the URL aliases are all for the aliasing and redirects and all those operations on the site.
So, Tim, who is sharing the screen now? Is it you, Tim?
I am.
So,
What do you want to see?
Yeah, can you please switch to a just a vanilla installation of Backdrop and then go to the site settings where we configure the site name? Yeah, so configuration and then system, yeah, site information, that would be it. So here's the thing, we have paths, right? And see how it says, there you go.
Yes.
So the fields themselves here refer to paths, but when we add the prefix, the entire thing is basically a URL alias. If you think about it from an end user perspective. So the portion of that entire thing is a path alias, but if you put it together with the prefix of the domain, is basically a URL alias. From an end user perspective.
Yeah.
From the database, from the database perspective, we're always saving paths. We're not saving URL aliases. That's my understanding, unless we're linking to external things, which is the redirects that we were saying before, right?
Isn't this a cultural gap between site building and module developing, right? Because like from the perspective of a site builder, when you're building things for people using out on the internet, you're constructing URLs, but like once it's inside the system, it's actually not a URL anymore.
It's a path.
The ACP is gone. It's now a path. So it is, you know, at different parts in its life cycle, it's both things. Like it doesn't seem necessarily wrong to keep both terms kicking around, although in specific cases, they might get, you know, it might be confusing to use both to mean the same thing on the same page, but.
Like here,
Yeah, you know.
isn't this referring to the same thing?
And
Yes,
like,
those are both.
one of the things I'd like to do in the documentation is have a page that talks about all the different kinds of paths. I'm in the developer documentation. It talks about all the different kinds of paths because we have a bunch of them. And it would be nice to be able to say, this term means that. And it might be that this term could mean A or B, but we shouldn't have two different terms that refer to exactly the same thing.
At least three. I mean, menu often means the same thing as well.
Yeah, well.
Right.
Right?
We have,
Like hook menu assigns a path to a function.
right. We have menu
so-
item. We have menu links, and we have
Items.
menu items, and we have menu router items. And
Right.
they're three separate things.
So there are
Route might be another one too.
there are menu router paths. And hook menu just talks about path in an unqualified way. And I think it's acceptable if to use unqualified path if the context implies a particular kind, because the paths that go into hook menu are sort of these oddities where the percents can be followed by an entity name, you know, percent node. And that kind of never shows up anywhere else. So it doesn't necessarily need its own particular type of path. It doesn't need its own name.
Yeah, and even then, as soon as you start having placeholders, it's not a path anymore, it's a path pattern, actually, right? Or it's not a specific path, is it?
It is
Technically.
it can be a system path. It can be a router path. A menu
Right.
router path.
Router paths are actually patterns. They're not explicit paths.
Right. So the backdrop philosophy would be to use the simplest English language use for any given thing. So if you can reasonably say URL or path, you should say URL because that's like the more human term, ironically, even though it's like a stranger word, but it's what's out there.
It's a technical acronym, but yeah, and you're making assumptions of technical knowledge there.
My grandmother knows, my grandmother's dead. My mother knows the word URL, would not know what a path is. So, you know, the further out there. But then if it's incorrect, so it seems reasonable at any given usage to say, you know, if it's at the brink to go for the simplest one that's not incorrect.
Yeah, I would say so long as we don't make things confusing, we can use them interchangeably. If one thing one of the two things means something specifically under certain circumstances. What I don't want us to get into is another layout and layout templates situation. So we decided that the things are going to be called layouts very early on, when we couldn't anticipate the disambiguation between layouts and layouts templates. That's what I would like us to not get into. Other than that, either way.
So the thing that is in the URL alias table, is it a URL alias or is it a path alias? If that's the object you were talking about.
Does it have the protocol? Does it have HTTP attached to it?
Nope.
No, it's only the path. It doesn't even let you have parameters.
Yeah, then it's a path.
Then it's a path.
Is it a URL path?
I think technically it's a URL path.
So does that mean we should change not only the 187 occurrences of path alias, but also the 62 occurrences of URL alias?
To be URL path alias.
Well, it'd be
URL
nice if it's
path.
just two words, something path, or currently the two contenders are path alias or path alias or URL alias. No, sorry. The two contenders are alias path and URL alias, right?
You even got confused.
Oh, I know. I mean, and I can't keep this stuff straight. That's why I want a single name.
Yes, yeah, you're right. That's where the problem is. Like if we get confused, then people that are new to Backdrop altogether. Yeah. So
it sounds like it's going to break existing code, though, right?
No. This is all in documentation. It's all in code names and comments. Don't change any variables. Don't change any function names.
All right.
Just in the documentation of code that shows up in functional descriptions. But then that will also propagate into human readable documentation when we start talking about what that thing is that you put into a layout and what it is not.
Yeah, it's gonna propagate to things that are in T functions, so translatable strings that we communicate to people.
I think
Robert, you gotten enough feedback to write up a proposal, a style guide page on how we should handle this, that then people could give feedback to?
I have. That's issue 505 says, what is the term? Either give your vote or vote for something else.
Well, I guess my point was to write something up where you actually take a position and you say, here's, based on the feedback I've gotten in the meeting, this is what I think we should go with, and this is why, and then let people respond to that.
Yeah, or maybe update the issue summary and say, as you said, the contenders are bullet points. This means that, this means that, and this means that. And then actually mention if these are mental sort of connection things that we are making up to explain things, or if they are actual things, right? I think that it would make, as in, are we making things easier for people to read or understand, whereas in a developer language it would be called something else, or that's what we actually call them? Am I being confusing?
Yeah, I'm not following that, sorry.
So the way that you were phrasing things before, I counted 3 contenders and then you say 2. So I was under the impression that it was path alias, URL alias, and then we mentioned URL path alias.
Well, I mentioned that, but what
Exactly.
Robert said in his issue is actually alias path, because in core, we actually refer to in code, everything's like router path, menu path. It's always some qualifier underscore path.
Yeah. So my point was, what I was trying to get to, and it was being confusing, was update the issue summary, bullet points of all the things that we have discussed and what they mean, just so that we flesh them out. It doesn't mean that we have a consensus, we might tweak it further to even remove certain items from it, but we need them, in the issue summary, I think, so that we can make a decision. And if you can put examples either in code or what we call them in the database and then in the UI or the documentation, then that would be perfect.
Okay, we
Okay,
have a next step. I
I'll
don't think
write
we
some
made
more
a
in the issue.
decision. Okay. Sorry, we can't be more clear yet, but I don't certainly have opinions on this. But we got about 15 minutes left in this meeting, a few days before feature freeze. Now, for those, just to clarify, feature freeze on Sunday means no new features in Backdrop. We can continue to make UX and design changes through January 15th. So a lot of the UX issues we're talking about probably aren't affected by the deadline on Tuesday, but one that would be the new node alias or the new pathless nodes. So does anybody have any other issues that are blocked that you need help that are blocked that would be affected, especially by the deadline on Friday or on Sunday?
just a clarification question of what that deadline means. Does it mean no new issues being posted, or it means an issue has to have gotten to a particular stage of review by that point?
So it means that beyond that point, we are not merging new features.
It needs to be merged.
So it needs to reach RTBC by that point.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can merge them if there's things like, we need to tweak the wording, we can still merge them because we have another 2 weeks to fix that as a follow-up issue. So in other words, what I'm saying, if it's a huge feature that makes a difference and we're just stuck on making decisions on what we're going to call things, we can still merge them and then make a decision later. We're not going to hold back features that are 95 or 98% done. That's what I was getting at.
Sure.
But after the feature freeze, anything that is tagged with the label type feature request cannot be merged. That's it, basically.
No.
Only bugs and tasks which are follow-up tasks can be, things that you need to add to feature requests that have been recently merged can be follow-up tasks. So they are labeled as tasks.
Yeah.
Sounds like this distinction would be good to add to the tags page in the documentation. So
yeah,
I'm just making a note of that.
Yeah.
Good, excellent. I know there is always a little bit of confusion about this at the end. And tests would be required before we can merge something, right? So we can't, a functional new feature that needs tests has to have them by Sunday, right?
Yeah. Usually it's a core decision.
Yeah.
If it's a complex feature that we better have tests along with it, a core committer may block it and say, sorry, it can't get in because it doesn't have any tests. But sometimes if it's a small thing, either we rush, fix the test, add the test last minute, or we just merge it and then follow up with tests.
Okay, so that has happened. Okay.
But it's an exclusion. It has to be like a tiny feature thingy.
Yeah.
It's not, if it's a huge feature, like, I don't know, mini layouts in core, then it definitely needs tests. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I've done is I filtered all the issues by the next milestone. We currently have 15 open of them. There's quite a few that are ready to be committed, and I'm looking for those that have UX in front of them. I don't see anything that is tagged as UX and has, needs feedback or needs work at the moment.
Okay.
But if you guys do the same and filter that, if anyone is working on any of those issues and needs feedback, just let us know. Because what I'm getting at is that some of them might be UX issues, they're just not tagged as that.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's, we could go ahead and talk about the pageless notes, and I can describe where we're at.
Yeah.
Let me do a quick, I have a site set up, and I just got to make a quick One more second. Okay. So where this is, the issue is at. One, I haven't had time to work on it this week like I hoped. So we're not where we hope to be. Also, for a reason I'm a little confused by, this doesn't look right, but it's good enough. Let me try this one more time. Was this must have been down here. No, I think this was up here. Okay. I forget why this this is broken, but anyways, it doesn't matter for the discussion. Where somebody's keyboard is really loud.
Wilbur, it's you.
Okay. What am I saying? Okay. Where this is hung up on was about it. Well, I think the biggest issue is whether or not to leave. This is a view right now, a view of 3 cards. And like one of the problems we were having was getting the cards to display in the right order. Apparently when, as far as I could tell, when Tugboat generated the cards, it generated them at exactly the same time. So I had ordered the cards by, time of creation, but which was working fine locally. But when Tugboat created the site, it had them in reverse, the opposite order. And the only explanation I had was that the time wasn't different. So it sorted them in a different order. Now, we thought about fixing this by using some other value to change their order to the order we wanted. But then Doc Wilmot pointed out something that has been discussed before, which is a view is really not the most natural way to create this feature. This feature is really about 3 kind of existing nodes on the front page, which could better be handled really in the layout. We did not originally use a layout. By a layout, I mean, for example, 3 regions, right? We could have a row with 3 regions in it and put 1 existing node in each one, and then we have complete control over it. I think that is a more logical way that a beginner might build something like this. But it also adds complexity. And right now we can't do that with our existing layout. Well, the existing layout in core, Boxton,
it would mean that we would need to change the homepage layout to something that has 3 columns,
right.
A region with 3 columns, which I don't object.
Probably the other option might be to have 3 existing nodes that are just themed to appear in 3 columns, but they're actually in 1 region. That doesn't seem to me to be, it seems to me if we're trying to make this simple and understandable to users, we would go with 3 separate regions. But yes, we can't do that with Boxton, so we would have to create a new layout. And I think I didn't get a chance to test this, but from comments that I did some really brief testing based on comments from Olaf, we may not be able to accomplish this goal with an existing layout. So we might actually have to create a new layout, or I don't know if anybody else has an idea on how we could create this with an existing layout. I don't know, but that's really where we're stuck is, we could just go back to the view.
Sorry, why we can't use any of the existing layouts? If you switch to the layouts, like configure layout, why not use Siemens?
Well, we might be
Geary, yeah.
We might be able to use Geary. The problem is we've modified Boxton. Boxton normally doesn't let you have a
full width
thing in it. So we've already modified that in Basis so that it allows a full width top, I think, right? It's header, top, and then content. So the top has already been modified by Boxton. So if we used Geary, for sure, we would have to make that same change in Boxton. Also, I'm not quite sure what changed, like the the 3 columns, we would actually want them to have a content class on them, which that might not be a problem. I don't know. We might be able to make Geary work, but it's going to involve some playing around. And that's, I had hoped to have a better sense of exactly what would be involved, and I don't have that. So what I think I'm looking for right now is feedback on 1, how to make this work, or
Yeah.
2, is this too big a deal? Go ahead.
Are you're creating these 3 nodes in code, right?
Yes.
So why don't, after you create the nodes, just run a little bit more code to tweak the modification dates so that they're separated by a second?
That problem is solvable. That sort of led us to this discussion about layouts. But then the discussion about layout, I mean, I think some people have been asking that question even before that issue. And, you know, I think the thought is that the layout, using a layout is a better solution for this. So,
Yeah, so the
and
problem that we
it
have-
happens to solve this problem. But even if we didn't have this problem or could solve this problem in another way, there's an argument, a case to be made that using existing nodes is a better solution.
Yeah, so basically, instead of using a view, we use node blocks, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, existing node blocks.
Yeah,
So we'd have 3 blocks with existing nodes.
and ideally, would place its block in a separate region. We'd already have 3 columns there, right?
I think that would be ideal, but a compromise might be 1 region with CSS style.
Yep, that would
So-
work as well.
I think this might be just because of the kind of sites I've worked on in the past, but I think I would have definitely gone with a view for this.
If they were non-pageless nodes, right?
Non-pageless nodes. I mean, that's not a factor.
It wouldn't be. Yeah.
No, my first thought is, how do I edit this if there's 10,000 of these?
Okay.
I mean,
And if
Right.
if they're in a view with a reference field, that's practical. If they're 10,000 existing content blocks on 1/3 of 10,000 unique layouts, that's not practical. So,
Yeah.
so
I
that
understand.
might just be because of the sites that I've worked on. That's where I
Right.
would go with that. But I think,
yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know. I would automatically make anything like this a view.
Well, okay, automatically, I definitely see where there are use cases where a view makes sense. I think as has been discussed, in anything like this, we have to be sort of opinionated. And I think we're envisioning a kind of a common use case, which is that this is about 3 blocks on the front page. So it's not about 10,000 nodes. It's not that isn't possible.
The other
Though,
thing-
you know, there are plenty of other scenarios that are possible, but I think the kind of use case we're describing wouldn't necessarily require those.
Yeah, the
And-
other thing is that I've heard, if I'm correct, I think Jen mentioned it, that we already have an example usage of a view in the homepage, which is basically the promoted content. And
Well,
right or not?
well, yes, but that's complicated because actually I started this out as 3 nodes, existing page nodes, and I made people complained that an example
showing
of a
up
view with only 1 node isn't a very good example of views.
Yeah.
So I added a second post. So then we had 3 existing nodes and we had 2 posts. And then when I showed that to people, the feedback was, that's too much. We don't want that much content on the front page. Let's
Yeah.
and so we actually consciously decided to make the cards a view
Yeah.
because we didn't want that much content. So if we go back to this, now, you know, we don't really have a good example of a view, and we'll just have to deal with that separately later.
No, you were right. You convinced me actually, because what we have is an example of a view with a single entry. So it's not out of the box. It's not like, we know that it is a view, and people that know how to use views,
Right.
they understand the value. But yes, all right, cool. So again, now that you have explained this, what is the problem with using a view for the cards? Like, what is the argument against it?
Well, there's what initiated the discussion was we had some problems with ordering. That problem is solvable. We can solve that problem. But that just triggered a discussion that a view, I think Doc Wilmont has most forcefully made this argument, but most of the rest of us have agreed that for a beginner, the use case that we were trying to formulate makes much more sense to most of us as 3 existing content blocks, right? It can be done with views, but that's adding complexity that maybe isn't necessary here and is maybe counter to our goal, which is, a pageless node in a block was kind of that was sort of the original use case for a pageless node, right? Is you've got a block and you just want to drop a page, an existing node into that block. And I think most of the time you wouldn't do that with a view. So
can I throw in an
Yep.
opinion here?
Absolutely.
So I mean, from the marketing perspective of the first taste of Backdrop, I think the non-view, the simplest possible thing that's not very scalable is a good approach, because that's kind of what people are looking for when they're thinking about how am I going to do my home page, how am I going to do my about page, how am I going to do like the first simple pages. When they get to later, all right, how am I going to do the 10,000 student pages? Then it won't take them long to find view and be like, oh, that solves that great. Like I think that's kind of a natural progression as your site scales, and I think it's very natural. But I think it's good to have something like this. Like, I mean, I think this is gorgeous. I think it's a very pretty, like, oh my God, that's what I want. I can do this. Let me just change the pictures, change the text, publish it, call grandma.
Yep.
Okay, so we're almost at 3:00. The other thing, even prior to this discussion of layouts, this feature is going to break contrib themes. And what I had hoped to do by this week was have a list of all the contrib themes that would be broken, and we could decide whether or not we thought a contrib theme maintainers would have time to fix them in the next 2 weeks. We don't really want to release a new feature on the front page that's going to break contrib themes. But there was some discussion, and we tentatively decided last week that maybe we should postpone this to the next release. Get this as one of the first commits to 1.22. And this whole layouts thing sort of, I think, was leading us also in that direction. If we're going to add a layout, there's more chance of there being bugs or problems that we haven't anticipated. And trying to force that in the last couple of days, especially with this other problem, maybe doesn't make sense. So I don't know. I'm kind of convinced at this stage, given the uncertainty about this and the problem with contrib, that our goal should be to just try to get this into 1.22 as quickly as possible, so that we've got a full recycle.
Yeah. Can we discuss the problem with contrib in the next meeting, the dev meeting? Because we need to stop this one.
Sure.
What I'm thinking is how we handle updates. So I was about to ask a question, but which is related to what you were saying. How does an existing website, Backdrop website, react to a core update if installed themes and modules depend on a previous version? So if existing projects, themes, declare a dependency on the existing version of Backdrop core that doesn't include this feature, how would the Backdrop side react to the existence of the update of the new version? Would it block the new version being installed until this is handled? Because that could be a solution. I mean, because
this is happening as part of the standard install profile, this won't even affect existing sites.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, the bearded man is here.
Wow.
Hello.
Let's wrap up this. Let's end our current meeting, and then we can all make fun of Nate and
Yes.
get ready for the next one.
Yes.
Okay, everybody, thanks for
Thanks.
the